So I read your website and blog and everything. You consider yourself a geek.
Yes.
And I know now it's sort of cool to be a geek,
right.
But I feel like that wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
Do you have any opinions on that? Do you feel like some people pretend to be geeks now and they're not real geeks?
Well, I think it's really hard for me to look at what someone else is saying or what else they're doing and to know really whether they're enthusiastic about something. And for me, being a geek is about enthusiasm, and it's about being social with enthusiasm. So with social media and with the internet, it's so much easier to reach out to all of the people around the world who love this very specific thing that you love. Maybe it's something very popular, or maybe it's a really obscure cartoon from the late 80s, and you can find the 300 people somewhere else in the world that actually really like that thing.
Right.
So, I'm not interested in policing anyone else's interests. If they feel like they need to learn something about, the Avengers to fit in, then that's just kind of funny, because when I was a kid, it was pretend that you know something about sports to fit in.
Yeah,
so, seasons and popularities come and go, but really I'm excited to talk about stuff that I love with pretty much anybody who's interested in chatting with me.
Yeah, that's great. And so you write urban fantasies. What separates an urban fantasy from a more general fantasy?
Yeah, so urban fantasy as a category is usually used to refer to contemporary fantasy, almost always set in a city, but urban fantasy has kind of grown as a label, so that a lot of stuff that's contemporary but not set in a city still gets called urban fantasy. But I think most specifically, urban fantasy it's contemporary, it tends to be set in our world, or a world that's fairly recognizable to ours, versus like a traditional fantasy, which is in the school of, or in the tradition of J.R.R. Tolkien, where there's a strong influence of mythology, and it's almost never Earth. So traditional fantasy, maybe what is people are more familiar with, and then urban fantasy, that's going to be your Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's going to be anything where somebody walks down a concrete street and then they see a monster in an alley.
Now, did you set out to write an urban fantasy, or did it just sort of evolve into that while you were writing?
Yeah, the idea for Geekmancy, which is my main urban fantasy series, started with the idea of what if fandom, what if being a geek, what if loving science fiction and fantasy media, comics and books was a magic system, or could be its own powers, because there's a psychological power in finding role models and kind of seeing a place for yourself in the world. But coming up, I basically lived in a game store kind of after school for a number of years when I was in high school, and then I worked there in college, and I loved that camaraderie, and I was thinking, how can I get to an urban fantasy kind of world and that magical paradigm through fandom and through the love of popular culture. And I was really inspired by works like Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, and other TV shows like The Middleman, where being a fan and being a geek is a part of kind of how a character is heroic. So then I folded that in so that the magic system itself is loving something. You can watch The Matrix and then do wire fu. You can pick up a lightsaber prop and then use it like as a real lightsaber. And then to take all of those things that I love and knit them together to become a magic system. So then you've got monsters and you've got different magic systems, and it's all really a celebration of popular culture and of geeks and the things that they love.
And your protagonist for the series is a female. What is it like trying to write from a female perspective? Did you do research, or did it just sort of come easy that the character's voice just sort of emerged? How did that work?
Sure. I wanted to have a woman in the leading role from a pretty early standpoint, because I'd seen books and TV shows and movies about geeks, and it was always guys. And it was white guys, almost always heterosexual, and in my experiences as a geek and having friends who are geeks, I knew that there are a lot of women who are geeks and gamers, there are a lot of LGBTQ people, there are a lot of marginalized gamers who don't get a lot of representation, and I felt like it was a good challenge for me to give myself to select a protagonist who is a little bit more unlike me in some ways of her lived experiences, while then having the strong continuity of she loves a lot of the things that I love. And I thought about kind of the totality of her life, not just being a woman in kind of a gaming and geek world, or not just being a bisexual woman in that world, but kind of the totality, and that at any given point, I'd think about how does her lived experience inform the way that she would think about this. But otherwise, I just first and foremost treated her as as a person and as the hero of the story, so that she's capable of making a change, she can save the day, and that I try not to feel bogged down by, oh well, but what would a woman do here?
Right.
Like, okay, what does this character do here? How is that informed by her lived experience and what she's had to grow up with? So I tried not to let it be intimidating, but I know that as I go across and, as I'm telling a story about, a biracial, bisexual woman, there's a lot of kind of lived experience there that I don't have access to. So I try to be open to kind of comments and feedback from readers, and I've been really overjoyed by the positive response that it's gotten, specifically from, geeky and gamer women who are bisexual and don't feel like they're represented.
So I can't name a character who fits that description of anywhere else.
Yeah, because in film and television, my experience, and I can only speak kind of from my own personal lived experience instead of being the person who's poorly represented. There's a lot of erasure of bisexual characters in.
I can't name a bisexual character. I can't think of one off the top of my head, at least.
I think there's maybe one male bisexual character in Scandal, I'm told. I haven't seen the show.
Yeah, I haven't
but
either.
They're incredibly rare, and there's a lot of stereotypes about bisexual people that I tried to avoid and or address, so that I could make a story that was not only inclusive of geeks, but inclusive of as wide a range of who can be a geek as is in reality.
Have you gotten a lot of support from that community? I'm sure they really appreciate you including them in that way.
Some of the kind of the best responses and most heartwarming reviews I've gotten, someone like posting on their Tumblr all in caps, like, well written bisexual female characters, like rips, and then like she talks about like kind of a Superman ripping your shirt off and revealing who you are and being proud of it. And that just means the world to me, especially to be able to represent people with different lived experiences that are very different from my own, and to feel, and for those folks to feel not like I've appropriated it, but that I'm celebrating and recognizing kind of their lives and their worth and their role in the community. So it's been very encouraging, and I get, fortunately, a lot more support than kind of gentle, loving correction, which I do get, and I'm happy to kind of take those lessons and to try to do better every single book.
Oh, okay. Oh, so some readers tell you that, oh, that's not that accurate, things like that? Yeah, and the thing I think I'm weakest on within overall like storytelling is having a truly organic understanding of what it's like to kind of be biased against if you're not white. Because a lot of my lived experience, I lived in New York as a kid, and I had a lot of friends who were Black or Asian and Native American or Hispanic, but there's such a day-by-day difference in lived experience, as I'm told, and I try to do my best to work that in, but it can be very difficult because it's just something I don't have to pay any attention to. Right. I get to kind of go through life on easy mode. As John Scalzi as a science fiction writer, he talks about how being like a straight white male means that there's just a lot of things in the world that you don't have to deal with. And I'm trying to find the balance between acknowledging those challenges and the biases and the discrimination that people of color face, while not having it overwhelm the story and not feel like I'm taking someone else's story. I'm trying to speak for them. Now, shifting gears a little bit, so besides being a novelist, and you've written several books and you have a series, you also host a podcast, and you also have a day job in the publishing industry. How do you balance everything? Where do you find the time to get everything done? Sure. So my day job, I do sales and marketing for a science fiction fantasy publisher called Angry Robot Books. And the nice thing there is that my personal interest in the genre makes me better at my day job. So anything that I do where I'm reading colleagues' books who are writers, that then lets me be better at my day job. And then the contacts I make through my day job or through being a writer let me have a better access to people to interview for the podcast, which is the Skiffy and Fanty Show. And we were nominated for a Hugo last year. So congratulations. Thank you. It was an incredible response from kind of the WorldCon community, which gives those awards. And
it's a lot of fun. I don't have to do like the editing for the podcast, so a lot of it is just, we watch movies and TV shows, and then we come together on the podcast to talk about what we like, what we don't like, kind of our critiques, and then I get to meld all of those perspectives together. So I feel like I'm better at each of those three things because I do the rest of them.
Oh, interesting. Do you, what's your writing schedule like? How do you try to write a certain amount of words per day, or how does that work for you?
I've found that it's most productive for me if I try to do a couple of sessions per day when I'm producing new work. So I'll get up. Lately, I've been trying to write for 20, 30 minutes before I even start the day job, just 8:30 to 9. And then I try to write during lunch and get as much done as I can. And then I usually write a little bit after dinner. And I have word count goals that I shoot for. And I've become much more thorough in my outlining. So I kind of tell myself the story and work out the beats before I write them, so that I'm working from a little bit of a script. And I leave myself room to kind of improvise and be organic and let the characters emerge, but I don't spend nearly as much time just kind of staring at a blank page going, what happens? So what happens? I know a little bit more going in, and it's let me hit flow state, like a little bit more of a flow state in terms of just being able to run through the story. And then I take confidence in the fact that I can come back and edit later, that the first draft is never the final draft, and that I can just kind of explore and putter around, and if I get on if I get derailed by something, I can just go back and change it later. And I've really been happy with how much the stories can come alive and add texture and nuance in a second or third or fourth draft. So the first draft, I just have to lay the groundwork.
Right.
It makes it much easier.
Cool. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think this has been a great opportunity, so thanks for having me on. And everybody who's watching, I've been really satisfied by reading more outside of my wheelhouse. So I read a lot of science fiction, fantasy, but I've been trying to read romance, and I've been reading nonfiction. And if you're ever in a reading rut, that kind of go to another part of the bookstore or find something else, and it can be really invigorating.
Oh, that's really good advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.